Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and Najee Moye.
All right, well, this is it. The last rapid reaction KOMO Sports End Zone of that 2024 NFL season, now bleeding into a few days of 2025. Seahawks beat the Rams 30-25. And believe it or not, there's a lot to unpack with this. And I'll start with this. I hear you all on social media. Not all of you, but a lot of you. Well, the Rams were playing their backups. It didn't mean anything for the playoffs. And they're not untrue statements, but it doesn't matter. Because this was about a lot more than that. This was about heading into the offseason on the right note. Let me give you a stat here. And a lot of you have already been made aware of this. But when you look at the Seahawks missing out on the playoffs, they finished with the same 10-7 record as the Rams. It went all the way down to the fifth tiebreaker, meaning the first four tiebreakers that the NFL uses to decide this sort of thing were still ties. That's how close the Seahawks were to making the playoffs. And, of course, we were scoreboard watching with other teams because it came down to strength of victory, all right, who had the more impressive wins. To that point, by the metric the NFL uses, the Rams had a 44%, the Seahawks 39%. So even that was pretty darn close, right? So that's literally how close the Seahawks were to missing the playoffs. Now, listen, you could go deeper. Well, if they didn't blow that lead to the Vikings, if they just beat the lowly Giants at home, all true. But this is still a pretty good season. First of all, 10 wins is the most since 2020. Did you know that Mike Macdonald set the record for most wins by a Seahawks head coach in their first season leading Seattle? Franchise history. It's Mike Macdonald. It's not Pete Carroll. It's not Mike Holmgren. It's not Chuck Knox. Great names, right? No, it's Mike Macdonald. And maybe he'll be in that area one day. He'll be mentioned with those guys perhaps one day. Way too early to tell on that. So to call this season certainly missing the playoffs is a disappointment in every way. But to call this season a failure or something like that, it's just simply not accurate. There's it's the best season they've had in a few years. And of course, there were a playoff bid in the middle there in 2022 in that stretch. So I think it's a good step is the way to put it. Are we jumping for joy? Of course not. But I think a lot of Seahawks fans, and rightfully so, head into this with a bit of optimism for what might happen next year. And I'll say this, excuse me, when I look at the offseason ahead, what really intrigues me, well, there's a number of things we'll get to in just a second, but from the larger picture standpoint, what really intrigues me is the idea that you get Mike Macdonald for a full offseason. Remember, he wasn't officially hired until the end of January. He didn't even go with John Schneider to the NFL draft combine because he was still trying to assemble a staff and get things going in that regard. So from that perspective, he gets a full offseason now with John Schneider. And we saw during the season, Mike was able to identify things that weren't working. Look at the linebacker spot. You know, you started with Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dotson. Those guys were gone by November. And Ernest Jones was acquired, and Ernest was a revelation. We just hope that he re-signs here in Seattle. The two sides amicably pausing those negotiations for now, so we'll see. It looks like Jones will become a free agent, but he told me, and we'll bring you some of that in next week's show of the KOMO Sports End Zone, he told me he wants to be here. He actually told me that he wants to, he knows for sure another banner will be hanging in the VMAC, a Super Bowl banner, and he wants to be here to be a part of it. Now, you can't guarantee he'll be here because of contracts, and what if some other franchise just blows away the Seahawks monetary offer, whatever that may be. So keep tabs on that. But that leads me into my next point here. This is going to be a really interesting offseason, not just from the standpoint of what I just said, that Macdonald and Schneider get a full year under their belt, the foundation laid working together. Now they know what kind of person really kind of thrives in this system on either side of the ball. Okay, that is interesting. But the first question is Geno Smith. Now, he made an interesting comment post-game after the win over the Rams. He said, it was really, I'm going to bring up the quote here because I don't want to even paraphrase per se. But it was really interesting from the standpoint. He said, this team is heading in the right direction. He really believes in that direction, with or without me. Oh, ears perk up on that, with or without me. Geno's situation, he has one more year on his contract, but it's the worst kept secret in the NFL, especially for all of us that cover the team here in Seattle, that he wants an extension. Do you give that to him is a question. It's going to be a full episode we do here on the KOMO Sports End Zone. But at face value, is there a better option for 2025? Let's say they decide they don't want to do the extension and Geno says he doesn't want to be here because they didn't do it. Where do you go in 2025? Are there options potentially? Are they better than Geno? I don't know. Probably not. But then if you commit to Geno, are you ready to commit to him for all those years? Do you have a succession plan in for somebody that you've just signed to what would obviously be a large contract? So that's a really interesting question. Do you extend Geno? If you don't, is he happy enough to stay here? Because the reality is the best situation is probably somewhere in the middle, right? You probably don't want to commit to 3 or 4 years, but you probably do want to commit for 2025. And by and large, Geno did have a good year. Now, the red zone picks, yeah, that was bad. We get it. But did you see when Sam Howell went in there? And I don't mean to knock on Sam, but I think it shows how much Geno did thrive with what was a really rough offensive line. So that becomes a big question. What do you do with Geno Smith? The other question, in addition to Ernest Jones, same deal as Geno, do you sign him to a new deal, is the Tyler Lockett question. And this is more of a nostalgic, it's more one that tugs at your heartstrings, right? Because Tyler made no secret about it, both when he talked with us on Thursday and post-game with the Rams game Sunday. He does not know if he'll be back. He does plan on playing another NFL season, but he just doesn't know if he'll be here. Because the reality is he has a pretty big salary cap hit if the Seahawks were to pick up the next option. So it may not make fiscal sense to pay that much money. It probably doesn't, even for as great of a man and player as Tyler Lockett is, to commit to that much money for what ultimately ends up being your third wide receiver because of the emergence of Jackson Smith and Jigba. And obviously DK Metcalf already being there. So Tyler, to that point after on Sunday, said he's so glad that his last target was a catch. And it was a big one. It was on the Seahawks go-ahead, what turned out to be game-winning scoring drive, 3rd and 1. Tyler Lockett makes the drive-saving catch. And from there, the next play was the touchdown pass to Noah Fant that won this thing. So, I mean, if this was the end of Tyler Lockett's 10 full seasons here in Seattle, a fitting way to end it. A dependable, surefire guy that you can always count on to catch a pass. And so that's where our attention turns now. About 109 days or so till the NFL draft. A lot of mock drafts, which I don't like mock drafts, but you can still read them. A lot of mock drafts between now and then. You have, after that rookie camp, and really when the draft hits, there's always going to be some Seahawks news because you have the draft at the end of April. Then you have rookie camp for the next couple weeks after that. Then you have OTAs, organized team activities, that come later in May, and mini camp in June. And then, of course, by the end of July, you have training camp, preseason, then it just gets rolling again. So it's true we won't see a Seahawks game for 8 months from now. Gosh, that's brutal. I hate that. But I had to look at the calendar to do the math there. But there will be Seahawks news, and I think this will be an eventful offseason. The Ernest Jones, the Geno Smith, the Tyler Lockett question, on top of others. When you talk about the draft, I mean, on the top of your head, they need some offensive line help. What do they do at 18, which is about where they're going to pick in the draft? So these are questions we can continue to talk to you on the KOMO Sports End Zone about. But that's what makes this Seahawks win a little bit different. It makes it a little bit different because all the things we said off the top, Jimmy Garoppolo is playing quarterback for the Rams. It wasn't Matthew Stafford. Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua weren't out there. Kyron Williams wasn't out there. The list goes on and on. But you end with a win. Okay? You win your last 2 games. You head into the offseason with that 10-7 record. You match the Rams in record. You do some things with Mike Macdonald making history. It just sends a little bit of a message or a vibe. I'm going to tell you guys this. It doesn't sound like it on the surface, but I'm at that facility all the time. There's a different vibe when these sorts of things happen. And it really does translate. You're going to see that energy, and you're going to see that optimism in the way this team approaches the offseason, both in free agent signings and how these guys work. I guarantee you Geno Smith will be there. He's always the first one there working out. So that's what this finale was about. It wasn't about beating a Rams team that had their playoff bids secured and wasn't going to risk the health of their quarterback and things of that sort. And of course, it was never that. It was about finishing the right way, finishing this first foundational year. And it really is that, the building the foundation of the Mike Macdonald era. I'm really optimistic for next year. Self-plug, I did predict a 10-7 season on our preview episode of the KOMO Sports End, and go back and look at it from September. That said, I did not think 10-7 would not get the job done for the playoffs. In fact, if you went all by record, the Seahawks would have made it, but it didn't. In fact, 15 NFL teams finished with a 10-7 record. The Seahawks are the only one to not make the playoffs. You can be disappointed by that, but you're not looking close enough if you don't see the potential and the promise of this team moving forward. Is it all great? Of course not. Are there things to clean up? Yeah, we talk about it. You tell me about it on social media. There's plenty to clean up, and they're going to do that this offseason. That would be the thought anyway. But finishing the first year where you completely overhauled everything, to finish that season with 10 wins, it's a good first step. And it only goes as far as they do next year, right? If they take a step back, if they win 8 or 9 games in 2025, okay, then we're having a different conversation. But right now, optimism is the name of the game. Finishing the right way was cool to see, even against a team that was, kind of putting an effort forth with their best players. It's a good win, just because they avoided the bad taste in their mouth of the offseason. They got the job done that they needed to get done. And now let's see this first full offseason with Mike McDonald and John Schneider working together. Let's see if they can lock up guys like Ernest Jones. Let's see if they can resolve the Geno and Lockett situation to an amicable thing on both ends. And that's certainly the quarterback question will be big. And that's going to be a whole other episode of this show. But this will be a highly, highly interesting offseason. So make sure you stick with us here on the KOMO Sports End Zone. We'll break down events as they happen, rapid reaction style. We'll bring you weekly topics. And we're going to keep this thing rolling, especially as we get closer to that NFL draft. Thanks for following along all season, and make sure you still subscribe wherever you download your podcast, and, of course, right here on the KOMO News YouTube page, where we will, again, dive into so many big offseason items, and it's a lot of them for the Seattle Seahawks team. Thanks for watching all year, guys.